promote another podcast
promoting
around. And we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the World of Grey podcast. In a society divided by black and white arguments, we are here to help you explore
the world of Grey.
I am Kelowna's Cougar Meat Kid Colin Cutler.
I am the Flow, Mike Chisholm. It is very nice to be talking to you all this week.
Warm
and I am
here.
excited about our topic, but I'm more excited just to be hanging out and talking with you, man.
Because I'm taking clothes off.
Well, I mean, whatever's really on the agenda, I'm always happy to hang out with the Cougar Meat Kid Colin Cutler. And I'm excited to talk into your face today.
We're going to talk at each other's faces today about drugs. We're going to talk about drugs kind of in general, and then we're going to go into a little bit of a controversy of addiction and whether or not addiction is a choice or a disease.
Yes.
We were talking about this before we went live on YouTube, before we did the subject live, about a meme bumper sticker picture that was being tossed around social media, basically saying that drugs are a choice, not a disease. And I was arguing against that a wee bit. Basically trying to say that these are much more complicated issues than just saying that it's everyone's has a choice and it's that easy to just pull yourself out of addiction. I think it's a really complex topic. Luckily, we have an amazing community, and it was actually quite a lively debate.
Yeah, even on the Facebook,
comments,
it was
really going back and forth with a lot of people agreeing that it's more of a 50-50 component. Which is why I'm a big believer. Like, we talk about how divided the world is within this podcast, but I strongly believe that there's a huge subsection of the world that wants podcasts like this and wants to discuss worldly issues in the manner that we discuss
without
them.
Hating each other.
Without hating, and just knowing that things are more complicated and there's two sides of each topic. It's just, unfortunately, with echo chambers and social media, the only thing that get put on there are very toxic.
I wonder if echo chamber is the most used word on our podcast. I mean, the most used word probably is something like the or at or something, but
nuanced. I
bet
say nuanced a lot.
Nuanced is a word that you do say. Echo chamber is another word that you say a lot.
I think echo chamber in this podcast is important though, right? Because this is kind of the reason I wanted to start this, is because of toxic echo chambers. Because we can get stuck in an echo chamber and not know what an echo chamber is, right? And
most people don't know what an echo chamber is.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch this podcast, you definitely do.
If you saw The Last Jedi, you know.
They talk about echo chambers?
Well, no, because Rey was in this chamber and like she would like snap her finger and it would echo, and it was like millions and millions and millions of rays.
Was it a metaphor?
She was being tempted by the dark side of the Force, but nobody understood how.
She was trapped in her own metaphor.
Star Wars week this week. On Thursday, the last Star Wars movie to do with Skywalker's come out. I've got tickets for the early and late show. And
we've bored 2 people. So this is just interesting. I want to know. I would like people to actually get involved with this conversation, because this is a debatable topic, and my opinion could be 100% wrong. So I want to talk about just drugs in general.
I want to talk about diseases in general.
That's not really where this is going. I want to talk about drugs in general, because Joe Rogan had a really good point on his podcast. Again, if you want to go see an actual podcast, go look at the Joe Rogan Experience. It's much better and more professional than this.
Oh yeah.
But
more entertaining.
He makes millions of dollars, so technically he's the man. Don't let the man get you down. I don't know what that meant. But he had a good point, saying that too often we just blanket term the term drugs and then demonize it.
Yes.
And I think this is a big reason why the war on drugs was so easy to propagate. Is that the right way to say that?
I think propagate is the right one.
It was so easy to propagate. Star Wars podcast next week.
I'm in.
Chisholm could do that on his own. We could get someone. I
bet you. We've talked about this before. I bet you that I could talk for 40 minutes straight about Star Wars without stopping.
Make a video and post it.
A 40-minute video of me talking about Star Wars?
Sure. People watch it. They watch it. If they don't, they don't.
I usually like to make videos with you.
It's called an eclectic mix. But I really agree with this perspective of not blanket terming drugs in general and saying they're all bad. Because there's an argument to be made that legalizing drugs and regulating them would be a better solution than keeping them illegal and having them on the streets and being controlled by drug dealers in the black market.
Yeah. Erasing an entire black market economy. And also, and this is where the things get a little spicy or dicey, depending on how you want to say it. You would drastically reduce the amount of people in prisons. Imagine if people who sold drugs or people who took drugs no longer had to go to prison if they were caught for doing so in a big, grandiose way. There's a lot of people who'd be suddenly released.
Yeah, that's a complex one, especially in the United States, because you have private prisons that need an
economy.
Well, they need a certain amount of occupancy to get the most amount of profit, right?
Yeah.
So this is my issue when you have jails for profit. The other reason why it gets really muddied, like the waters get really muddied, is when it comes to minorities and non-deadly offenses. No, what's the term? Non-violent offenses.
Non-violent
when
offenses.
It comes to drugs, because this was a form of, in my opinion, a form of voting suppression, right? Is if we lobby and push for marijuana laws to be really strong, and minorities are the ones most
who like the marijuana.
No, it's not necessarily just that they like it, but they're like preyed upon more by police for being checked for drugs and then being arrested for nonviolent offenses. And the more of them that are in prison and not allowed to vote is better for, and I hate to say it, but like the Republican Party that lobbied for these higher drug laws, right?
Right. You talk about how minorities are preyed upon more. You want to know who
Kevin Jeffries has joined us. Charles has joined us.
Bears don't discriminate. They'll prey upon anybody, whether they're minority or not.
Here for Comic Relief, everyone. Just as we get onto a train of thought, you derail it.
I'm relieved from any comic stuff right now. My palate is now cleansed. No. But that it's a complex issue for sure. And the idea that you get an entire, whatever it is, a group of people, whether it is a race, whether it is a class at a certain income level, whatever, you get them addicted to a certain drug, and then you make that drug offense so egregious that if you have it 3 times in some states or some areas, you go to prison for like 10 years. There seems something a little hinky there, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well,
and then sorry, I don't mean to, continue on in monologue, but I'm going to monologue for another minute. And then, other income classes can just go to their doctor and sign off, and they can get synthetic versions of the exact same drugs. And their insurance companies will pay for it for them because it'll be pain management.
Yeah, I mean, we're
pain.
Kind of jumping around a little bit. I mean, we're discussing whether or not marijuana is addicting by mechanism is a whole nother conversation. But this is also a big reason.
I was thinking more like crack, but
this is also a big reason why politicians like Bernie Sanders are trying to talk about or bring forth that prisoners should be allowed to vote.
Yes,
because. So I had this talk with somebody once about that one point, because when Bernie said like, oh yeah, everyone in prison should be allowed to vote, I was like, whoa, like I don't know about that.
Right.
But someone was saying like, oh well, if you allow people in prison to vote, then the people in prison are going to be lobbied to, or like speeches are going to be directed towards them by, let's say, the Democratic Party, so that people in jail are going to vote for them. So I was like, hey, we're going to free everyone if I become president. But on the flip side of that, if you're not allowed to vote in your prison, that encourages a party that isn't going to get those votes, say by minorities, to lock more people up so they can't vote.
Yeah, let's marginalize more people.
Right. So for me, that's way more dangerous, imprisoning innocent people, than the off chance that somebody's going to lobby for, I don't know, lighter prison sentences or something. Because the other thing too is you're still going to have a caucus that is like, whoa, what the fuck are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot more checks and balances there than there is when it comes to fear mongering about drugs, because that's what happened with the war on drugs. Is that Reagan, the war on drugs? When Nixon, that's right, Nixon. But when the war on drugs started, this was exactly what happened. They fear mongered. Yeah, they fear mongered marijuana, and then people got unproportionately arrested for having marijuana. So
yeah.
Okay, so we've discussed this before. So Charlie's asking, thank you, Charlie, for joining us and contributing to the World of Great podcast. Without
Chuck.
People contributing, it's just us rambling on. Even with people contributing, it's a bit of us rambling.
We'll ramble with people.
Speaking of decriminalizing drugs, what are your thoughts about safe injection sites? So I honestly haven't done a lot of research on safe injection sites and like if they're helpful or not. I am a big believer that if any one program goes on for a prolonged period of time, then it has to have positive statistical effects, or most likely they would
that's a good policy.
Get away from that program.
That's a good policy. Do you have that policy in your relationship with Jen? There has to be good statistical results. Otherwise, you got to abandon certain things.
That's 2 sides you made me do, and we've been live for 20 minutes. Rob just said Reefer Madness, which I would love to talk about. Gail Sharp has joined us.
I think we should all have edibles and watch Reefer Madness.
I think that, yeah, that's what we should have done. We should have done some drugs before we started this. Damn it! Plan your life, Colin.
But to go back, drugs and addiction, though. That's what we're talking about here. And is it addiction?
I'm leading into that. We have 45 minutes to fill.
Are you leading into it? Are you?
I was talking about drugs. I was talking about drugs in general. Have you done drugs in the past, like other than marijuana?
Okay, so yeah, what do we count as a drug?
I did drugs this morning.
Aspirin is a drug. Like aspirin's what you did caffeine this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, I have done 0 drugs today, unless there was something hinky that we put in the baby smoothie. Because I had a sip of that. I had a sip of the baby smoothie. I also had a couple Old Dutch popcorn twists fed to by the baby. So I'm curious if I don't think I've done drugs. There's probably some sugar. Sugar is a drug.
Sugar is a bad
Sugar is a drug. Sugar is a drug that is, they say, okay, so if you want to say addictive chemically, are things chemically addictive to people? I think the answer, my answer to that is yes. There are some studies that say that sugar is as addictive as cocaine. Or heroin.
So we have to break that down a little bit. They're saying that because when you ingest sugar, it releases dopamine. Is that right? Dopamine? Yeah, sounds right. It releases the same feel-good chemicals as cocaine. There's a really good...
so good, too.
True.
Yeah.
There's an interesting meme that I saw that was comparing processed sugar, processed flour, and cocaine, and saying how similar they are because they all start as a plant, they all get processed down to a fine white powder, and they all fuck with your hormones when you take them in their processed form, right?
Right.
Spiking of blood sugar, massive releases of hormones, spike and drop, like, right? So a high and crash,
right?
Like they all have that, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Your original question was, have I taken drugs? Okay, so full disclosure,
raisin bread is a drug.
Raisin bread is a drug, especially when it was made by my grandma. May she rest in peace. Yeah. Anyway,
drug passed.
Marijuana, mushrooms. That's it.
So,
other than alcohol.
So this is an interesting thing. So yeah, so we have on one end of the spectrum, we have things like alcohol that deadens senses.
Depressant.
It's a depressant. Yeah. Basically makes you not feel anything when you're not feeling it. And then you have drugs like marijuana that's technically a stimulant. So it can make your brain race really fast. It can heighten anxiety. Then you have...
I never get heightened anxiety with marijuana. I get the exact opposite.
Well, you got the good stuff.
I go right into the...
Right, so there's
gonna be all right.
There's more
because everything is gonna be all right. Everything is gonna be all right, everybody.
Especially if you smoke weed. So there's drugs like marijuana that are pretty, that you're never gonna overdose from, that are pretty mellow. Then we have psychedelics and we have chemical drugs, and I think this is where it starts to get hairy because we start to lump things like psychedelics in with chemical drugs. And so like marijuana is kind of this fringy thing at this point because it's legal in Canada, it's legal in certain states. We're starting to understand the research behind it. Alcohol is just legal because if we try to make it illegal, people will riot.
Yeah, they tried that once. It didn't work out so well.
They tried that once and I heard it wasn't.
I have a comment. Can I read the comment?
Yep.
Okay. Eva from Abbotsford says, Eva from Langley. No, Eva from Fort Langley says,
hey, Eva.
Do you have any thoughts regarding teens who do drugs as a form of self-medication versus doing it out of boredom?
Ooh.
Is there any practical way of helping some of them steer away from it? Out here, we are seeing too many people die. Yeah, well...
Can I just say one thing? Right in the middle.
You can say many things.
Right in the middle here. Sorry, you have such a pretty face and you're hiding it.
Where?
One thing I want to say is how do we get kids away from the habit of drugs just out of sheer boredom? YMCA, I'm telling you, this is a huge reason, not just fitness, but this is a big reason why the YMCA's charitable side exists. Is to get kids off the streets and doing things that are more productive.
Yeah.
And this is what I love about the YMCA. Hey, why'd I lose 2 people trying to advocate for kids not being on drugs?
You didn't lose them; they just came to my watch party because that's where things are. That's where things are going on.
But yeah, I think it's interesting knowing the difference between, or discussing the difference between drugs out of boredom and drugs out of self-medication. So this is
Yeah, those are two different things, I think.
So we can go back to chemical versus psychedelics in a second, or maybe we'll forget, who knows. But when I went to a conference through work where a guy discussed medical marijuana. Sorry, what was the question? Yeah, okay, there's a couple things there that I just
regarding teens who do drugs as a form of self-medication versus doing it out of boredom.
Practical way to
see. Here's the thing: when it comes to marijuana, I started when I was 38. Like, I waited till my prefrontal cortex was done.
Yeah, so that was that's one point. Okay. No, you can definitely talk about that. Yeah. But the self-medication, is what I was going to get to. So when I went to this workshop, they talked about self-medication. So here's one of the fallacies with marijuana, is that marijuana causes schizophrenia. And I think I may have talked about this once before on this podcast.
Talked about that.
But so THC is the psychoactive chemical that's in cannabis, and then CBD is the antipsychotic that's supposed to balance it out. So yes, with the way we produce the recreational drug, way higher THC points than it naturally would occur in nature, right?
Yeah.
So there is more of a psychoactive component.
Yeah, they monkey with it.
The issue with making the leap of logic from it has a psychoactive component to it causes schizophrenia is when people don't know.
That wasn't me.
Sorry, that was me. When people, if somebody starts using marijuana and then they are schizophrenic, we go, oh, well, the marijuana causes schizophrenia. What this workshop was saying is that's not what's happening. What's happening is this person is schizophrenic, and schizophrenics, before they know that they're schizophrenic, will subconsciously seek out self-medication. And a lot of times that self-medication is marijuana.
What?
Then they have their first psychotic episode while they're in the middle of doing or smoking marijuana, or smoking marijuana on top of a bunch of other drug-seeking behavior.
What?
So yeah, maybe it does help induce the first psychotic episode. I'm not arguing that, but what I'm saying is marijuana does not cause schizophrenia. If that was the case, as soon as marijuana became legal in Canada, we would have this or in Colorado would be Colorado would be a better statistic, right?
Yeah, but except for the province of British Columbia for the last 30, 40 years would be the most schizophrenic place on the planet.
But you wouldn't have the ability for statistics, right? Because it wouldn't be legal.
No, nobody would understand them because everybody would be schizophrenic.
So with it being legal in Colorado, this is something that could be tangibly looked at, and we haven't seen this crazy spike in schizophrenia in California, in Colorado or California for that matter. So that's one thing just to watch.
I've got a comment and an agreeer on this.
Dan has joined us.
Leah Campbell.
Jeff Christie has joined us. Pete has joined us.
I believe so. Oh, it's a whole family. I got Cherie on my watch party.
Cherry's
that's right. She's on my watch party. Not this little dog and pony show. Leah says this: I believe self-medication is a Band-Aid effect, and we need mental health classes within our schools. Our kids need to be taught to deal with their issues and their feelings. Cherie agrees with Leah. And you know what? I get that.
Nailed it.
I think there's two things, and I think I've said this before, but I think there's two things that are not taught in our schools that need to be taught. And if they were taught, we as adults would be much, much, much more well-adjusted humans. Money and relationships. If we understood how money worked.
Critical thinking, too.
Okay, well, now we've got a trifecta. I think critical thinking is taught within schools, within the way schools are, but it could be taught better. It could be taught more proactively, but relationships certainly aren't. And I think mental health would kind of fall under that category, because if you knew how to deal with every type of person that you come across, including those who have mental health issues, or if you yourself have mental health issues and you learn how to deal with other people, that would be a tool that you'd use every moment of every day, pretty much.
I think Sherry nailed it, because
that was Leah.
Leah nailed it.
Sherry agreed with it.
Leah nailed it.
Sherry was like the follower and Leah was like the leader. In that category, that right there, in that moment, not at all times.
I think that's just
might be at all times. I don't know.
A really great point is there's always some sort of
their lives
root cause for a drug addiction.
Right.
And there's a ton of world of gray here. This is why this is a great topic.
Yeah.
Genetics are going to play a huge role. I was just looking at an article before Mike showed up. I was basically saying that addiction is 50% genetic, and addiction is a hardwired evolutionary response
Yeah.
for survival, because if we as a animal, right, as a human animal, are looking
Goddamn
for
right, I'm an animal.
certain foods to survive on, and we find one that works for us and that we like, our brain is going to tell us to seek that out more and more.
Right.
Flash forward to a society where we're a lot
end
more
the podcast. I was like, oh, that's out of nowhere.
So like
It is
15
it is
minutes.
a society with, oh no.
Flash forward to a society that's much more complex and has a lot more. And this goes, there's a mental health book. Oh, I forget what it's called. We teach it at the Y. Because I read it and I forgot.
Good dog, bad dog.
No, it's not
It's a
good.
good
Bad
title
dog.
for a mental health
But
book.
what it's talking about is our anxieties are very natural because of survival, right? We have to worry about X, Y, and Z as primal beings.
Sure.
But now that we don't have to worry about X, Y, Z, we have to worry about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, right? So we have created all these other issues,
Right.
which has caused an increase in anxiety and depression. I mean, you can include social media in there now that we're in 2019. And if we have deep-rooted childhood trauma or any other cause and effect that makes it really hard for us to cope with the stresses of our world or from our past,
cope with things. Yeah.
we don't have the proper coping mechanisms.
No, not the proper
then-
coping mechanisms.
Then we might seek out drugs as that coping mechanism. And it's not the drug that is causing the addiction. It's all the things leading me up to seek out this drug and use that drug-seeking behavior.
Now, is that just drugs, or is that also things like we talk about people with addictive tendencies? So
Courtney has joined us.
Going to the casino. Yo, Court. Going to the casino. Obviously, the casino preys upon people who have addictive tendencies.
Yes.
The lights, the sounds, the rush of things, whatever. It hits the brain, all sorts of, and it's not just those things. I would say the food industry does the same thing. I would say that, so there are people who have addictive tendencies, but then there are some who also think, okay, yes, but alcoholism is an actual disease.
Yeah.
And are those two the same thing, or do you have an industry that can literally prey upon people who have a genetic condition, saying that they're going to crave more and more and more and more alcohol, the same way that other people have that with sugar?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if sugar addiction is a disease or not. Or there's also psychological. There's the addictive tendency people, and so Budweiser's like, hey, we can kill two birds with one stone. We can hit two markets, quote unquote, at the same time with our fire water.
Well, let's break down addiction a little bit.
Sure.
So Gabor Mate is Matt.
Gabor Matt.
Gabor Mate. Mate.
No, I'm just going through
French,
options.
right?
Let's go through options.
So he works in Vancouver in East Van and he's an addiction specialist, and he defines addiction as any, I'm probably going to butcher this, but any behavior that you continuously are involved in, even though you don't want to be involved in that behavior, that causes negative effects, right?
Yeah.
So this is anything from gambling to drugs to food addiction,
certain ex-girlfriends,
to consumerism, to sex, to pornography.
Sure.
It's any behavior we wish to stop but don't stop and has negative effects.
Like
and
a
then
$200 a day Fabergé egg habit.
Sure. He goes into
like
the cause and effect of what causes these addictions. And a lot of it is rooted in childhood trauma. So,
so that would be behavioral rather than genetic.
Right. So if we just kind of back pocket the behavioral form of addiction,
right,
and then include the genetics for addiction that we talked about, that's an evolutionary predisposition.
Yes.
So we have a 50% chance of having this genetic component. So that makes it a lot harder to not end up seeking out drugs or some sort of addiction.
Do you have addictive tendencies?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah?
100%.
Where do they manifest themselves?
You put a bottle of Percocets in front of me, get them away. See, the
really?
So I'll tell you why. And I've rationalized this and I've broke it down.
You're addicted to Percocet?
Oh, yeah, kind of, I guess. I don't seek them out or buy them illegally, but I've had them before. And for me, as someone that's had chronic pain, probably even before I started wrestling, and now my chronic pain is like death every day. I can take Advil all day long and it barely touches the amount of pain that I'm in, because it's literally from the top of my neck to my fucking ankles, right?
Right.
But I've been given a Percocet before, and it's the only drug I've ever taken that is 100%, even for the short term, taking away my pain.
What else what else comes with that? What comes with
a fuzzy feeling of feeling good? Right, of course.
Do you feel dumb?
No, I just feel a little bit intoxicated.
Do you feel clever?
No, I feel like I just want to watch TV and eat food.
Oh,
But the drug seeking behavior of what that is me just being tired of being in pain all the time, right?
right.
So if given the opportunity, you put a bottle of Percocets in front of me and say, I don't want these, I'm probably going to take them because I don't like being in pain, and that's the only thing I've ever done.
Okay, I promise you, buddy, if ever I have Percocets and I have some left over, I'll give them to you. No problem, man. I have no problem with that.
So, I mean, really, the question that we're at this point of the podcast is how much of addiction do we have control over? How much of it can we actually stop? What does it take? Do we need external forces like friends and family to really help us through? I mean, for me, I'm not a big believer in free will. And as you were coming in, I was reading a government research article that was on a government website. It was just brilliant, and it's going to kind of debunk me a little bit, which is fascinating because I
love being me bunked.
I like being having my ideas questioned.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of scientists that argue that we don't have a lot of free will,
right? And
so that can be factored in with things like drug addiction. So all these things that lead up to the drug-seeking behavior, like childhood trauma, the people you're around, right? So that's going to affect your access to these drugs. And then your family dynamic as you're growing up.
Sure. Yeah. No. I just the free will thing bugs me.
See, I can see your face going. So this article I'm going to show you afterwards is going to make you feel bad.
I can put it down softly, or I could bang your cans.
Yeah. So I mean, if you listen to Robert Sapolsky, he has that point.
Free will.
So he's arguing that we have very, very little free will as human beings.
Okay. So we're on rails.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. There you go. And you can, and I'm not saying we don't make choices. We definitely make choices. The argument against free will is saying that those choices are because of other predetermining factors. Renee talked about it a little bit when we did the podcast with her. So maybe I'll just get into the article that I have here, unless anyone else has something to say. Jeremy has joined us.
Cherie says, yes, addiction is absolutely partially genetic. There are definitely a great number of people out there who have addictive personalities. That's also why there are so many families out there with multiple members who are alcoholics, addicted to drugs, gambling, etc.
Yeah. So the article that I was reading is fascinating in the fact that it's not saying, so this article is not debunking me in the fact that it's saying that we definitely have free will and it's a tangible thing that we can measure.
Right.
But in the realm of addiction and free will, what this article is basically saying is that if somebody, so they had a control group and they had shown a group a bunch of research from scientists arguing that free will does not exist. What do you love? Oh yeah,
Somebody got my Fabergé egg joke.
So this article is trying to say that when they pretty much got this one part of the control group to lessen their belief in free will by showing them scientific proof, basically, or scientific research that doesn't exist. A lot of negative behavior started to happen. So they would cheat on these tests they would do, especially especially if money was involved. It's like, if you get this amount of questions right, you get a certain amount of money or whatever. I don't know what the research was, but they had all these little incentives, and they had these people lessen their belief in free will, and there was a lot of negative behavioral outcomes that became of this. If they solidified someone's belief in free will, it basically stayed neutral into the control group.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the result they're saying is from this study is that most of our society believes, I'm not ending the podcast, most of our society believes in free will, and this is kind of what keeps us level to the point where we have some sort of self-responsibility, for lack of a better term. So it keeps our behavior where it's at, baseline where it's at. But if people start believing that determinism is the way of worlds, way of the worlds, negative responses happen. I have a few questions with the article, because if you're taking people that believe in free will and then at the time you're kind of questioning their belief in free will, I can see that cognitive dissonance causing negative behavior. Like, I don't really believe in free will, but I also believe in social responsibility or individual responsibility, because you still have to be in the critical thinking mindset to make choices based off everything that's led to that point. So I still have to have a mindset where I am keeping my values as my baseline, right? So the
Okay.
non-aggression principle, have empathy for people. So whether I agree that I am really making these choices off free will or not,
Right.
because I'm someone that has empathy and keeps that moral baseline, all those things that I kind of just do naturally are based on that underlying foundation of morality. So that's one of the factors that makes me make these decisions. Does that make sense?
It totally
Yeah.
makes sense. And it's an interesting idea. Now, when we throw the drugs into this, we throw in a factor like drugs or gambling or something like that. Like you have made this is where I go back to the free will thing. Maybe we are on rails. Maybe we're all just in a mine car that's going to a certain destination, and we're allowed to look around the mine car, but that's basically it. If our version of looking around the mine car is like, okay, so I look at you, right? You have said, you know what? I'm going to be in a relationship with Jen. We're going to buy a house together. We're going to do these things and move forward. Other people say they have an interruption and their priorities get shifted. Like drugs get thrown into the equation, or gambling gets thrown into the equation, or alcohol gets thrown into the equation, which is a drug, I guess. And suddenly they say, okay, well, you know what? As much as I like this house and all this sort of stuff, nothing is going to supersede my need to drink.
Yeah.
And I'm going to drink and I'm going to drink and I'm going to drink and I'm going to drink. And you know what? The house is going to go away. Okay. I got to make sure. Okay. No, I'm going to keep drinking and I'm going to end up being down in Tent City. And basically that's going to be the entire crux of my life. To me, you are exercising free will and not going down that path, even though if I hand you a handful of Percocets, you have there's a part of you that would be like, yeah, I'm going to eat all those Percocets. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So is that not some form of free will?
I mean, that's a great point, and I do understand. I do understand what you're trying to say. Is that certain people that have the same determining factors leading up will make different choices.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess we get into a little bit of a semantics game there.
Is it semantics, or is there some free will, but it's just
but we also
that's still, the game is still fixed. But
so again, I've said this a million times, in the lapse of data we make up stories, right?
Yes.
So we don't, like, if I have me and I have person B, or I have you, let's use you as
I'll
an
be
example.
person B.
You can
No,
be
man.
person B.
Yeah.
And we
Call me
have
Mikey B.
from my understanding, we have very similar backgrounds, and we grow up, and then I choose life over drugs and you choose drugs over life. I don't know all the other little mental games you're playing. We could have the same similar situations that come up, and our brain can deal and process them differently. And
Yes.
you could be more susceptible to depression and anxiety, and I could be less susceptible to depression and anxiety. We know that there's a genetic component to depression. Robert Sapolsky is somebody that talks about that as well.
Yes.
So maybe the things that affect you hit you harder. Then someone presents you with these drugs, and you take these drugs, and you're like, that's it. That's the thing that makes me feel better.
I found the answer.
And that addiction is now because of how it makes you feel, not because of the drugs, the addiction mechanism within the drug itself.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
it's
that
not
they're
DNA at that point. It's
Right.
It's behavioral.
It's behavioral.
It's environmental.
And I'm also, just to be very, very clear, I'm not saying that drugs don't have an addicting mechanism to that. It's just, it makes it harder for when you have all these traumas that lead up to it,
Right.
to break that mechanism. Like nicotine literally works chemically by making you crave the nicotine
Yes.
to like slow all your anxieties and stuff. Like
yes,
that's
as does Reese peanut butter cups.
right. So that's a great point too, right? It releases that. Social media is another great example of that. Getting those likes,
Getting that
releases.
fix.
They know that when it's that maybe effect that Robert Sapolsky, I apparently just listened to Robert Sapolsky, to what he talks about is when you go, hey, I wonder if I have some likes on that post.
Yeah.
And then that anticipation leading up to it releases just enough dopamine that's close to a bump of cocaine.
Right. Oh,
Right.
Really?
So it's these little chemical addicting drugs. Now we want to say, okay, well, what about the person that has the traumas, does the drugs, but decides to get away from the drugs because they won't care more about their family, where they're going to have a lot of determining factors that make them make that decision as well.
Yeah.
Maybe they saw someone go down that road. Maybe they've been down that road. Maybe they are so in love with the person that they're with that they have made the decision long ago that no matter what happens, they are doing everything for that person and not for themselves.
Love conquers all.
And that's how I feel about Jen. Jen makes me want to be a better man, and that is a big reason I make a lot of I make a lot of choices based off how does it affect my family? What is good for my family? I also am a person that critically thinks. I'm a person that does a lot of research.
You think critically about a lot of people.
Very much so. But I have some childhood traumas that had never been dealt with, and there was a lot of repercussions to that, and there was a lot of addicting behaviors that I was seeking out in my younger years. Like I drank a lot because I was a party guy. I did my drugs when I was in my 20s. I was just looking for a good time, so I wouldn't have to think about all these things. And when my anxiety spiked really hard in 2015, it was at the suggestion of my doctor that I went to counseling. It was her saying it, me going, yep, I'm ready, right? But before that, I wasn't ready. And I think this is the same pattern we see with addiction, is when people aren't ready, they're not going to go through the steps. So what are all these things that lead up to them actually making the decision to actually get away from these drugs and off of addiction? It's nothing to do with the drug. The drug's in them. It's chemically. So now if we look at it from that end of what makes somebody go into recovery, it kind of debunks the whole drugs are not a choice at all, right? Like I'm just saying on the other side is at some point, you're right, there has to be some sort of choice to get out of that. But what I'm saying is, even to me, that's not necessarily proving free will, because there could be, everyone has to hit that rock bottom, right?
My dad says that. It's funny because, I wanted to get into 12-step programs a little bit, just a little bit here, because, and whether it's a disease, whether it's an addiction just on environmental and on your personality and all that kind of stuff, regardless, I think it's safe to say that we can all agree that some people are addicted for whatever reason to certain things: drugs, gambling. My dad, it was anger. He's got a mental health issue. He's got a mental illness that causes him to get angry, and there he lived in denial for a long time. And I think a lot of people who are addicted to things live in denial for a long time. One thing that he talked about, and that is also in common with the first step of 12-step programs, is that you have to. The way my dad says is you have to have an aha moment. You said you just have to hit rock bottom. Yeah. The first step in the 12-step program, whatever it's for alcohol, drugs, sex. Whatever behavior it is, and they're using the 12-step mentality. The first step is to admit you're powerless to whatever it is that you're seeking help for.
Isn't that kind of admitting that you don't have free will?
Yeah, it actually is, because and it has a second part to that, that you have to believe in some sort of higher power. Right. Many people choose God. I could choose this glass if I want to. But there's a higher power that will kind of help you out of this situation, and you will cry out for help to that thing. So I can see why a lot of people would choose God over like a glass, but because God's probably got more clubs in the bag to help you.
I really like that part of the 12-step program, and like I'm not religious, admitting that
you're powerless,
but because it's kind of like admitting like you are not the center of everything.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's I've hit rock bottom. I am powerless, and there is something more powerful. There's a higher power. And I totally agree with that.
The government.
The government
is the higher power. I like what you said.
Or Vince McMahon.
Damn it. I really like the point you made about behaviors being addicting, because I think this was a big issue for me when I was younger, is I was pretty much addicted to doom and gloom. Like everything was the end of the world.
So not the video game, not the first-person shooter, Doom.
Yeah.
I was addicted to that for a while. Had a couple LAN parties.
Didn't The Rock
that went off the rails?
Someone in the movie Doom.
Rock was the star of the movie Doom.
Nice. But yeah, like I was addicted.
You were addicted to bad news.
Bad, and just like being really hard on myself. Even when I started wrestling, just like thinking I was a piece of shit, and like I don't know what, but like it was my thing, like being negative and thinking I was the worst person ever and that life is terrible. It was like, I don't know, it was like my weird comfort zone. Like I don't know, it's weird, right?
Did you hit a rock bottom
negative
moment?
Yeah, 2015. My I started having panic attacks because I had suppressed a lot of stuff. I spoke, like I said this before, I spoke at all my grandparents' funerals. I never shed a tear. Like I was pretty emotionally shut down. And I had trauma when I was at such a young age that I don't really have a ton of memories.
Right.
And the memories I have are like sheer fear and anxiety and also like it was some abusive behavior that never was fully dealt with because it was kind of lied. Like I found out later, like 2 years ago, that it was lied about and like said that these incidents only happened once when even though I have very little memories, I know that they happened more than once.
Right.
And then I just never dealt with them. And then my parents got divorced and never dealt with it. My grandparents died, never dealt with it. I just suppressed everything until I was 25.
You want to know what's crazy about this?
What?
I knew you in 2012.
Oh yeah.
2012, I was introduced to you by the man Jonathan Cathcart. Much love, JC. Love you very, very much. And then we even worked together. An Invasion starting in October of 2013.
Yeah.
You didn't have your rock bottom moment until 2015.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, like let's
just let me go down this path.
Yeah.
Like, hey everybody, be there for your friends.
Oh, totally.
I had no idea. I had no idea. He's saying this now, and I'm just like, God damn, I could have helped him for 2 years.
But I didn't
could have
know.
tried to help. Yeah, I guess.
But I didn't know, right?
True.
And I wasn't dealing with it. And you're right, though. Even when I was having, like, before I actually went to counseling, when I was having these panic attacks, I was having them at work.
At the Y?
Yeah, pretty much every day. And I literally taught boot camps that I don't even really remember teaching. I remember people going, "Oh, great class," and thinking like, "How the fuck did I even get through that?"
Oh my God, you were time warping.
Yeah, like I had meetings where I had to go back and check like the minutes after because I don't even remember being in that meeting.
You were on autopilot.
Autopilot for sure. And I remember my manager at the time, Lauren, who's married and has a kid now, so I'm super happy for her. That's amazing. But she was like
Lauren from the Y.
Yeah, she was like the only person that really kind of could see it and kind of made me think about it. And then I ended up with insomnia for over a month, where I was sleeping about 2 hours a night, just kind of broken up into like 20-minute, 10-minute spurts.
Those are long nights, man.
And that was a symptom of this depression and anxiety. And yeah, I had all these little things to that I was seeking out, but I wasn't like taking a bunch of drugs or anything. I'm sure it was like I drank a little bit and but I just wasn't dealing with it, right? And all the other little things that I used to do to deal with it, I was just in a more responsible time in my life where I wasn't like doing a bunch of drugs and like drinking all the time. Or when I worked at the restaurant, it was just easier to be young and party and never think about it, right?
Right.
When you suppress those things, they build and they build and they build, and this can lead to extreme drug-seeking behavior. Luckily for me at the time, I was also working on myself with critical thinking and whatever.
Sorry, I just read
so,
Rob's quote.
Yeah.
Doom did suck.
So when my doctor suggested counseling, I just said, yeah. My nerves were just shot in the doctor's office. And I was just like, she was like, for what we're talking about here, there's just no reason for you to be this anxious. Like from just at face value.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Did you use pro wrestling as a coping mechanism?
Oh, I still do.
Yeah, but you've also very, very much more in touch with yourself. And if anyone knows,
I touch myself quite often.
Touch with themselves.
It's the Cougar Meat Kid, Colin Cutler,
and the flow understands. So, but at the end of the day, you're going through this stuff, insomnia, emotional, whoa, anxiety, all this sort of stuff. And then it's like, yeah, Friday night, I'm going to do a moonsault and the crowd is going to go crazy and it's going to be nuts. And my adrenaline and all these things are going to spike, and it is going to be medicine for how I feel, because this is the only time that I feel joy, proper, right?
Yeah.
Was that something that was there, or am I way off base?
No, not way off base. Wrestling is more of my way of getting away from the world. So we have this this podcast.
Isn't that alcohol to others?
Totally, 100%. I'm not saying it's not the same thing. It definitely is the same thing.
Is wrestling a disease? Next week on the World of Gray.
I use wrestling as escapism on a bigger scale.
Okay.
We have this podcast. We talk about all these worldly issues, and we find the middle ground. But as a person that just does this all the time, and me and Kyle were joking that's a good thing I have a podcast, so I can rant to a screen and to you. Yeah. So I don't, because like my friends don't want to hear an hour of me talking about why addiction is a disease over over a choice. But yeah, I mean, I use wrestling because deep down, I kind of hate the world, and I don't want to. I'm not saying that I should. I'm not saying that we should all hate the world, but I do. And that's just some negative thought process that I've formed over the years. And when I come back from a weekend of wrestling, I always say it's like the volume's turned down on life. You know what I mean? And I think it's that I'm addicted to when it comes to wrestling. And then obviously like the dopamine
It's a
release
hyper
of
realistic.
people chanting
Yeah.
or booing,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
When people are chanting your name. So people are like, why, if you're so beat up, why do you keep wrestling? Have you ever had multiple hundreds of people chant your name? No. Well, it's pretty fucking addicting.
I'm like that with public speaking. When I'm public speaking and I've like got the audience, like they're there, and I can take the energy and I can boil it out and I can throw it back on them and I can bring them up and down. Oh man, I love that. There's no better feeling than that.
So Charlie is saying that he's had some bad repressed childhood memories. Thank you for sharing that, Charlie.
Thanks,
thank you for being vulnerable. And I think this is a big thing everyone needs to work on, is being vulnerable. Childhood memories come back to me and I dealt with them by talking to someone I know, and it really helped just to get it out.
Yep.
It's been better since then. Still have the bad days, but they are for their partner. So super proud of you for doing that. Keep doing it. Go to counseling if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, Kelowna Counseling Service will subsidize the price.
Third Space Life Charity.
Third Space, that's right. Sorry, I forgot about Third Space.
Charity, man.
It's just so important. And since 2015, it's not that I've been an advocate, because I'm not like going around with signs and picket signs, but I've tried to be
Lisa Marie's an advocate. We are, we have opinions.
Mediators. I've been trying really hard to help break the stigma of mental health. I went to counseling. I love counseling. Counseling in a lot of ways probably saved my life a little bit, because who knows the negative patterns I would have continued on. I still struggle with it. I haven't been back to counseling in a couple of years because I still have that part of me that doesn't want to bother anyone, and really has a hard time working on my own shit. But we should. And yes, I'm more critically, like I think more critically, but it doesn't mean I always think about my behaviors as critically as I should. But I think this is just an important thing to bring up when it comes to this discussion of what causes addiction.
And this is where I think that people who are addicted to alcohol, addicted to some of these vices that they're using at the end of the day just to put a mask over what they're really feeling or what they've really gone through or whatnot. And it could be anything at that point. It could be carrying around a security blanket, it could be any of that kind of stuff. But then again, there's also the idea that no, my DNA is hardwired that when I have booze, shit's going to go down and stuff's going to happen. And that's the really difficult part in this discussion, because there's so many people that have been affected negatively by people in their life on drugs, maybe they themselves on drugs, on alcohol, that sort of thing. And where did it come from? And that's why it's so important to do these introspective deep dives into ourselves and say, why do I behave this way?
Yeah.
And if you analyze your own behavior, I mean, maybe you might scare yourself, like, Charlie's talking about repressed memories coming up. Holy cow. But at the end of the day, I think if you were to ask him, would he rather not know or know? I think he'd rather know.
Yeah.
Like having that stuff come up is not a bad thing. My dad, man, one of the things, he grew up in horror. Like he grew up in an absolute horror show on his own at 15, working construction, working with men, just because he needed to get out of the horrible situation he was in, and he did. And he repressed that shit, and he had anger issues, and it disrupted his life for decades until he had his rock bottom moment about 6 years ago. And now, I mean, he's a completely different guy because he's able to talk about these things, but he even knew, I have to run away from this. I don't want to deal with what happened to me in my past, and I mean, so to me, that type of personality is ripe for the picking when it comes to becoming addicted to something.
Yeah. And this is why the article I was just reading today that actually made me rethink a lot of my own point of views is really important. Is we should, in the realm of addiction, what this is arguing is if we don't encourage people that they can pull themselves out of it, that they can make the choice to pull themselves out of it. And so in essence, encouraging the fact that they have the free will to do so.
Yeah.
If we don't encourage that, there could be some negative consequences there. I think that coupled with, so from someone from my point of view that doesn't believe in free will, I need to be more empathetic to the fact that might be what somebody needs. It's the same thing with I may not believe in religion, but having Christian values for a lot of people is what makes them get through life and gives them a structure to be a good person. So I think there's so much gray area, even for someone like me that has some pretty hardened stances on things like free will. I also believe empathy is the other big one. Is a lot of these discussions where we want to talk about like the facts and we start getting really fixated on the little technical things.
Mhm.
I think people that are arguing against a lot of these topics are lacking certain empathy because maybe they haven't been through it. But we know with addiction, it could happen to anybody.
Yes, absolutely.
So it may not have happened to you or anyone around you, but for you to just yell at someone and say that they're making bad choices and it's all on them, like that's not helping, especially if that's the reason they started doing drugs in the first place, is because they, you know, think they're a disappointment to everyone. And then you're saying that they just need to get their shit together and it's all a choice and make them feel even worse about themselves, because this could literally happen to anybody because we're all just a bunch of people living in a society divided by black and white arguments. But me and Chisholm are here to help you, all of us, and ourselves explore the world of gray. Thank you for joining us on the YouTube. Peace. Love. We went over on YouTube.
Went over YouTube?
Yeah.
All right.